The Haunted Peak, a true dark story. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, a region rich with history and mystery, there exists a place known only to the locals as Whistler's Peak. For centuries, stories of strange happenings and eerie encounters have surrounded this mountain. Some say it's the ghost of a miner. Others claim it's something far darker, something that waits for the curious to stumble upon its secrets. Chapter 1. The journey begins. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Emily decided to take the hike that would change her life forever. The air was cooler than usual, and the mountain peak stood tall against the gray skies. Emily had heard of Whistler's Peak since she was a child, but she never truly believed the tales. Haunted mountains, ghostly whispers, and cold spots weren't things she thought were real. Until today. Her friend Mark had been talking about hiking the peak for weeks, and Emily, always the adventurous one, had agreed. They weren't prepared for what they were about to encounter, but that didn't matter at the time. The thought of exploring the unknown was too tempting. The lure of history, the mysteries whispered among locals, it all made her blood run a little faster. The forest grew thicker as they ascended the trail, the canopy overhead blocking out most of the light. The leaves crunched beneath their boots, and Emily felt the weight of the silence settle around them. It was unsettling, but she shrugged it off. After all, it was just nature. "Shouldn't we turn back soon?" Mark asked, his voice breaking through the stillness. Emily shook her head. "We're so close to the summit. We've got this." They pressed on, the trail becoming steeper with each step. As they neared the summit, Emily began to notice something odd. The wind had stopped completely, and the temperature seemed to drop. A cold that had no reason to be in the middle of fall clung to her skin, and she found herself pulling her jacket tighter around her. Mark, too, seemed uneasy, his gaze flickering to the darkening sky. It was then that Emily heard it. A faint sound, a whistle, barely audible, yet it cut through the air like a knife. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. Mark noticed her hesitation. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily nodded, the blood draining from her face. The sound was coming from the top of the peak, but there was no one there. There couldn't be. "Probably just the wind," she said, trying to sound confident, though her voice faltered. But deep down, she knew it wasn't the wind. Chapter 2. The Whistler's Curse. They reached the summit just as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the land. But there was something wrong. The summit wasn't like the other peaks they had hiked before. The ground was uneven, jagged rocks jutting out from the earth, and the air felt thick, like something was pressing down on them. "Let's take a quick break," Mark suggested, his voice tight with nervousness. "And then head back down." Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. It wasn't just the mountain, it was the very place they stood, as if the earth itself was alive with some ancient, malevolent force. She turned to look around, and that's when she saw it. At the far edge of the peak, partially obscured by trees, was a small, crumbling cabin. Emily hadn't noticed it before, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. Mark noticed her staring. "Is that a cabin?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Yeah, it must be abandoned," Emily replied, but she couldn't bring herself to look away from it. "Let's not go near it," Mark said quickly, sensing her growing unease. "We've had our fill of adventure for today." but Emily couldn't resist. Something about the cabin called to her. The whistle from earlier seemed to echo in her ears, beckoning her forward. Against her better judgment, she began walking toward it. "Emily, wait!" Mark shouted, but it was too late. The cabin was old, the wood rotting in places, but the door stood slightly ajar, as though someone had recently used it. Emily's curiosity overpowered her fear. She stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath her feet. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. She could barely make out the faint outlines of furniture, long abandoned. But it was the walls that caught her attention. They were covered in strange markings, symbols Emily didn't recognize, drawn hastily in what looked like charcoal. As her eyes moved from one symbol to the next, she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "Emily, this is a bad idea," Mark called from the doorway, his voice tight with fear. Emily barely heard him. She was too focused on the symbols. One in particular caught her eye. It looked like a face, twisted in agony, with hollow eyes staring back at her. A shiver ran down her spine, and she stumbled back, tripping over a pile of broken furniture. Then the door slammed shut behind her. Mark's voice cut through the silence. "Emily!" Emily tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. It was then that she heard it again, the whistle. But this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the cabin, right behind her. She spun around, her heart racing. But there was nothing there. Or was there? A shadow moved in the corner of the room, flickering like a candle in the wind. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her body frozen in place. It was a figure, tall and thin, with hollow eyes. The figure seemed to be watching her, its presence heavy, suffocating. And then, a voice. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was raspy, like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Emily's mind screamed for her to run, but her body wouldn't respond. The figure stepped forward, and Emily could see the twisted face more clearly now. Its mouth was stitched shut, and its eyes were filled with malice. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. But the figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, pointing at the door. It was as if it was showing her something, a warning. But what? Suddenly, Emily's body was flooded with a feeling of coldness, icy, unnatural coldness. She turned to the door, desperate to escape, but the figure had moved closer, its hand now resting on her shoulder. "You're not leaving," it said. A scream tore from Emily's throat as she pushed against the figure, her hands desperate to pry it off. But the figure was immovable. The room seemed to grow darker, the walls closing in on her. She felt suffocated, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Chapter 3. The escape, just as Emily thought she couldn't breathe any longer. The door suddenly burst open, and Mark rushed in, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her out of the cabin. The cold that had gripped her loosened, and the darkness seemed to fade away. They didn't speak as they ran down the mountain, the whistle still echoing in their minds. But neither of them dared to look back. When they finally reached the bottom of the mountain, Emily's legs gave out, and she collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" Mark asked, his voice shaking with fear. "I don't know," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't human. And as they sat there, staring up at the mountain, Emily realized the truth. Whistler's Peak wasn't just haunted by the ghosts of the past. It was cursed. and it was waiting for the next curious soul to come looking. If you're ready for more chilling, true, dark stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like the video. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever encountered something you couldn't explain? Let us know and keep watching for more spine-chilling tales.